All righty. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fourth Preservation Next Academy session. We're going to be focusing on financing of small to medium multifamily preservation today. We've got some amazing guest speakers from enterprise as well as external partners. And just a huge thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today and all of our attendees. Just a note, make sure that you're on mute today while you're listening. We'll have time for Q&A. Throughout the sessions, we ask that you use the chat to note your questions, and we'll be keeping an eye. And then after presentations, we'll have a brief period of Q&A. Anything we don't get to today, we will follow up with folks after the fact. So we've got a packed agenda, a lot to cover. Just a quick overview of our agenda today. We're going to kick off with hearing from our Northern California and Southern California offices from Caroline McCormack and Ruby Harris about local and state funding resources for preservation. We'll also highlight our funding resources guides in our preservation toolkit. We'll then talk about some actual financing products. We'll hear from Eve-Goldstein Siegel with Enterprise Community Loan Fund, Dan McDonald with Community Vision. And then we'll be digging into a tool that is available through our National Preservation Toolkit. It's a financial modeling tool. And Zack Patton from our Enterprise Advisors team will be joining us and walking us through that tool. We'll then jump back to some local work in California and hear from two of our partners in California, Oscar Monge with T.R.U.S.T South LA and Tom De Simone with Genesis LA. About financing that they've engaged in together focused on small to medium multifamily preservation. Again, after each of these presentations, we'll have a chance to pose some questions to our panelists, so please do pop those in the chat as we are going forward. All right, next slide. Just want to thank our funders without whom we would not be here today. So a thank you to Mackenzie Scott, CIT, and a big thank you to Kaiser Permanente for your amazing support of our work with Preservation Next and this program. Just want to quickly remind folks, and for some new folks that may be joining us today, Preservation Next is the national enterprise program focused on the preservation of affordability and small to medium multifamily properties. For us, these are mostly properties under 50 units, though there's a little wiggle on that upper limit. And we are really trying to focus both on the preservation of that stock, but also the stability of the residents that live within these properties. And so this is part of our Preservation Next program, which includes a National Preservation Toolkit, this Academy, as well as a future pilot capital product. Next slide. Just to highlight our Preservation Next team, my name is Sarah Haas. I'm a Senior Director with Enterprise out of our Southeast market, and I am the lead for Preservation Next, working with Jesse Wang, our Preservation Fellow, and Megan Volkovic, who's our Senior Advisor. Next slide. And then our great California team, who is also leading this work with us. You'll hear from Ruby and Caroline today. And then we're also supported by Elizabeth Richards and Geeta Rao in this work. So a big thank you to our market teams for your partnership in this work. I just want to highlight our sessions. We're in our fourth session right now. You can access the recordings of our previous sessions as well as materials. And I think Jesse's going to pop that link into the chat. And then you can also register for future sessions. These are all public, and so we'd love to see you come back for some of our future content. All right, with that, I'm going to now pass to Ruby and Caroline, who are going to talk about actual funding resources that are available to you to preserve this important stock. So Caroline, I'm going to pass to you first.
Great. Good morning, everyone. So great to see you. I think before I dive into the resources that I'm going to keep at a super high level, I also wanted to acknowledge that we've had weeks and weeks of extreme weather and flooding, and that many folks on the line, both who are working in community and operating and owning these buildings, are dealing with a lot. And so we're going to pop a link to a blog post we just came out with that has some resources around disaster recovery that we hope can be of use to you. And then I think in the coming weeks, we're going to be doing individual check-ins to just see how you're doing and how enterprise can be a resource to you as we recover from this extreme flooding. Okay, so shifting gears to dive into today's content. Again, I'm going to briefly mention just a sample of some state programs and programs here in Northern California to consider for your preservation projects. I think In particular, I want to lift up primarily the public resources, both live and in the future, because I think as many of us on this call know, these projects very often rely on public subsidy to be a slice of that capital stack. So that's where I want to focus. So I think starting with the state resources, we have this year the launch of the Foreclosure Intervention Housing Preservation Program. This is the most significant infusion from the state for rehab funding we've seen in recent years. This will be a $500 million program to acquire and rehabilitate 1 to 25 unit buildings at risk of foreclosure or in the foreclosure process. And you'll see there who the eligible borrowers are. The draft guidelines came out last year. They look, we're pretty happy with them, although we're waiting for that final version to come out. Definitely something to look at if you're in the 1 to 25 unit range of buildings. And then I would mention that Enterprise in collaboration with the Stable Homes Coalition will again be running the community anti-displacement preservation program legislation and budget request ask for another rehab program, $500 million for that long-term public subsidy that these projects need. That would not be restricted to the 1 to 25 foreclosure risk project type. That's more broadly acquisition rehab. So we're hoping it catalyzes larger and medium-sized buildings as well. You can go to the next slide. Again, I'm not going to go deep because we're going to just point you to the toolkit where all of this information lives, but looking at some Northern California funding resources for preservation here. Of course, Bay Area Housing Finance Authority is staffed up and they'll be launching their first pilot for preservation, a $15 million pilot that will be available this year. And then lifting up that Oakland just passed their Measure U housing and infrastructure bond. It'll be $350 million for housing, and a portion of that will be decided will be for acquisition rehab, and that will be launching this year. We've got a couple other programs here, and this is not at all expansive toolkit. The toolkit has more. And with that, I will pass it over to Ruby to talk about SoCal quickly.
Thanks, Caroline. Welcome, everybody. So in Southern California, we've got a couple of great preservation pots of money to look forward to. United to House LA is a transfer tax that is projected to produce anywhere between 700 million to 900 million annually, of which 10% will be set aside for preservation. And city staff has indicated that that will be available late this year. And then the housing linkage fee, which was passed a few years ago, now has a balance as of June of 37 million, of which 4.9 million is projected to be available for preservation early this year. I have not heard exactly when that RFP will be coming out, but we will make sure to update our system when that is available. And then the County of LA currently doesn't have funding available, but they did a community land trust pilot program for this type of SMMF preservation last year. And the board is currently considering potentially refunding that. And so that is to be determined. Next slide. So today I wanted to take just a couple minutes here to introduce you again to the Preservation Next Toolkit, and specifically to the funding sources inventory. And so Jesse is sharing the screen here. This is the landing page for the toolkit. And if you scroll all the way towards the bottom, you'll see a button to click for the funding sources inventory. So when you click there, it gives us an opportunity to select from one of 10 regional markets, which includes Southern California and San Francisco Bay Area. And so just to grab a couple of examples of how you can use this tool, if you go to the San Francisco Bay Area and then click on the San Francisco Small Sites Program, you can see here what the geography is, who administers the funds, what type of debt it is, what kinds of projects are eligible, and a lot of really good information about the program itself. And then there's a live link to the program so that you can go ahead and contact the folks who are running that program. And then in Southern California, I will look at the New Generation Fund. The New Generation Fund is a fund that Enterprise runs very much in coordination with the city of Los Angeles. And it is an acquisition loan type for both preservation and new construction. And same thing here, you can link up to the website here. But on each of, so this just kind of gives you a look at how the toolkit works. Please feel free to scroll through it and look in your particular area of the country for the funding sources that are available in your area. And then just to highlight that this isn't an exhaustive list. And we really welcome any information that you have from your area. And so please feel free to reach out to any of us with any updates to the information that we have on our website, and we'll certainly endeavor to keep it updated as well. It's a living document, just like our financing environment. And with that, I will pass it along back to Caroline.
Okay, great. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists here. I'm joined by two esteemed colleagues, partners from Enterprise and Community Vision. First up, we'll hear from Eve-Goldstein Siegel. Eve is a senior loan officer at Enterprise, where she provides financing to affordable housing developers and community development practitioners across Northern California. Eve brings 10 years of experience in community development finance, and prior to Enterprise, she helped manage the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco's affordable housing program, providing subsidies to hundreds of affordable housing projects across California, Arizona, and Nevada. And then we'll hear from Dan McDonald. Dan is a senior business development officer at Community Vision, focusing on developing client relationships, structuring capital, and assisting with underwriting and workouts as needed. Before joining Community Vision, he spent 6 years in the public sector and 28 years in investment real estate. So they'll start with a 7 to 10 minute presentation, which we will hold them to, and then we'll have some time for some questions. I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we'll have time to hear from folks in the chat as well. So with that, I will pass it over to Eve.
Thanks, Caroline, and good morning, everyone. I'm Eve-Goldstein Siegel, and as Caroline mentioned, I'm part of Enterprise Community Loan Fund, which is one of the largest nonprofit community development financial institutions in the country. While the bulk of our lending is for affordable housing developments, we also provide financing for community facilities, such as community health clinics, schools, and nonprofit office space and community space. Next slide. Enterprise's loan fund kind of shares the same footprint as a wider organization, and we work across the country with a greater concentration around our market offices. As mentioned, we have 2 offices in California, one in San Francisco and the other in Los Angeles, but we serve communities throughout the state. Next slide. Most of the financing we provide is for early stage development, such as acquisition and pre-development loans. However, we do have specific products for preservation of affordable housing, which I've summarized here on this slide. There's a lot to go into, but I would say the products or programs that work best for acquisition of small and medium multifamily properties are the Bay Area Preservation Pilot, or BAP, and Match in LA County. Both of these programs were designed specifically for acquiring operating rental properties, and both have some flexible features that are designed to work with these property types, including higher loan to value to allow for funds to cover rehab and repair costs, longer loan terms, and lower interest rates. BAP was initially launched in 2018 with $10 million of seed money from MTC, the Bay Area's transit agency. and the program is administered by S Enterprise and the Low Income Investment Fund. I should note that at the moment, Enterprise does not have any more funding available through BAP, but I believe the Low Income Investment still does. And there's definitely funding available with the match program in LA. However, there are other subsidies. Available. And I was going to mention that we do have a mini perm loan product that doesn't have any other funding sources. It's just Enterprise's money. So it's similar. It has that can go up to 10-year term, but not quite as flexible as BAP or match, but is a good product that could be paired with local or state subsidy. And the last bucket that I called California Acquisition Loans is largely referring to a program called the Golden State Acquisition Fund, which is geared more towards a traditional land acquisition for new development, but can also be used for preservation. It's a shorter term, up to 5 years, and interest only for the entire term, but we can go up to 100% LTV for nonprofit borrowers and 95% for for-profit borrowers, and this product is available anywhere in California. Next slide. So I wanted to share with you a case study of where we use the BAP program to provide the senior debt to Bay Area Community Land Trust to help them acquire a 13-unit rental property in North Berkeley. This property, the former owner was attempting to use the Ellis Act to evict tenants and convert the apartments to condos. But the residents protested. They got in touch with the Berkeley Rent Board and got connected with the Bay Area CLT, who helped negotiate a sale of the property. This project was unique in that the seller had already started renovating some of the apartments, and many of the former tenants had already moved out. So typically we would require, and through the BAP program, we do, one of the requirements is that a property is at least 80% occupied to ensure that there's sufficient project cash flow to make debt payments. But we were able to make an exception for this project. And since the project is located in a transit priority area, it was eligible for funding under the BAP program. Next slide. So here's an overview of the acquisition and rehab budget for the Solano Avenue apartments. A few things to note is that you'll notice under the sources that equity from Bay Area CLT is not listed, but they did have to carry costs for a while, such as the property reports like property needs assessment, seismic, environmental, and escrow deposits. And this was actually an extraordinary long escrow period for over a year. And so although Bay Area CLT got reimbursed those funds from loan proceeds when we closed, they did have to come up with those costs, cover those costs up front. I wanted to mention that, so we use the BAP loan, which is there's two loans combined into one. I won't get into the details of that, but we also paired it with the city of Berkeley, a small sites program, and they were able to provide 3.9 million, which is a significant amount. And because they came in with so much money, we were able to use the BAP loan to build in several capitalized reserves. I wanted to make a note that, with the city funding, there are several jurisdictions in the Bay Area that provide funding specifically for preservation, but some of them have a one-time NOFA and others are on a rolling basis. The city of Berkeley is on a rolling basis, and that was really helpful because they were able to take advantage, at any time when the opportunity arose, rather than applying for the funds, one or two times a year. And lastly, this I think another thing that made this project unique was that they were able to obtain 3 project-based vouchers from the Berkeley Housing Authority, which allowed them to reach families with lower incomes and also maintain a good amount of project cash flow from those three units because they are getting the contract rents from the Housing Authority. So, next slide. So just a few considerations to keep in mind when you're thinking about acquiring unsubsidized SMMF properties. So in determining your short-term acquisition financing needs, you'll also need to think about what the long-term financing plan from the lender's perspective will want to know. What's your plan to repay the senior loan? Is it through refinance, resyndication, use of public funding sources, or something else? And in underwriting these types of properties, we have found that the physical needs are oftentimes greater than we initially budgeted or anticipated. So doing the best due diligence upfront with a trusted engineering company. Also note, certain property characteristics like tuck under parking are likely to have more seismic issues, which may require more rehab and be costlier. Then, what are the current rents? Are they closer to 50% AMI or 80% AMI? If they're on the higher end, maybe possible to acquire the property without any public subsidy. But if the average rents are on the lower end, and you want to maintain that level of affordability, you'll want to maximize the amount of public subsidy, or and really limit the amount of debt you carry on the property. The third thing that I wanted to point out is really over the past year, we've seen some significant increases in several different operating costs, particularly insurance cost. So you want to make sure that you know what is required from your lender or other financing sources, and that the insurance company will even offer you that type of insurance and get a good estimate of what it will cost, so that you can have that have the most accurate operating budget. And then that sort of ties into my last point of capitalized operating reserves. So if, I would strongly urge to build these into your budget. Many developers plan to use the property tax exemption to lower their operating costs, but depending on the jurisdiction you're in, this can take some time, and you'll have to make those payments while the exemption is being processed. So having a capitalized reserve to cover those costs during that period. Same with operating costs. Almost inevitably, expenses will come up in the first couple of years that you didn't expect, and so having that reserve is really provides some cushion. So those are the main things. I saw one question that came in that asked when the Solano Avenue Apartments was acquired, and it was acquired just last year in June of 2022. But I will pass it over back to Caroline, and we can do more questions at the end.
Great. All right. Well, we'll hear from Dan, and then we will jump into some questions.
Good morning. Human Vision is considerably smaller than Enterprise, both in footprint and dollars out the door. We cover Northern and Central California. We've been doing this since 1987. We've expanded over time into the 46 county footprint, and occasionally we'll do something even outside of those. We have made a big push into the Central Valley in the last 5 or 7 years. And the project I want to mention is one in Stockton. Next slide. But I wanted to also mention we have a consulting division that works with nonprofits, and I see from the attendee list, there are some organizations that I believe have been able to take advantage of this kind of consulting work. And I urge anybody from our service area to contact us about these kinds of consulting services. Next slide. Like many CDFIs, we're diverse in the kinds of loans we do. Affordable housing is probably 20–25% of our total loan volume. We're working to expand that. We are also part of the Golden State Acquisition Fund. We're one of the participants. We're part of the Small Sites San Francisco Fund. We've used that program a couple times, and I believe that the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority program will be taking advantage of that as well. We make loans out of our own capital, and find these other programs can really help lower the cost of borrowing. Next slide. So our loans are similar in many ways to enterprises, the rates, the amortization, the term, the amounts. I believe we're about to move from 5 million up to 10 million as our maximum loan size. But we will work with nonprofits and for-profit housing developers for pre-development, acquisition, and refinance and construction. Next slide. So the case study is a small apartment building near downtown Stockton. It is a great example of being able, the nonprofit developer, Visionary Home Builders, was able to secure this even after investors were very interested in purchasing this property. It was in terrible condition. Next slide. These are some interior photos of the interior: smoke damage, water damage, fire damage, and squatter damage. This was an unusual acquisition loan for us in that the property was severely impaired, and we also did not know the source of repayment. Next slide. So the challenges were multiple, and it took much longer to underwrite than we anticipated. The seller was able to be more patient, but we and the borrower encountered so many of these problems that are not unique to preservation deals, especially one that's in this bad of condition. One item that we found really difficult to close is that the borrower had a very difficult time getting insurance that was required by our loan on this property because of its condition, and I think that might have held up closing for some time. But these kinds of challenges are part of what we try to deal with when we provide loans. Next slide. And the loan we made, here are the terms of it. I have good news to report in that this loan is about to pay off sometime by the end of the month. The takeout is the Home Key program, state funding here in California. So our relatively short involvement from 2020 to now has turned out to be a very successful loan for us and for the borrower. Next slide. And the intention of the borrower was always to buy and renovate the property and have a local domestic violence survivors organization manage this as transitional housing. Stockton has a huge need for this. So we're very proud to be part of that process. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks to you both. I think now we're going to jump into some questions. I'll start with one, and then we'll just jump into some of the questions that have already come up in the chat. So, Eve, you spoke to this a little bit in your presentation, but can you both talk about some of the critical elements necessary to make small to medium multifamily AC rehab deals pencil, and what do you think is missing in the current sort of landscape of existing financing tools that we need to work on finding more of, I guess?
Sure. Well, I can jump in. I think I mentioned it a couple of times, but really is pairing debt with subsidy, local subsidy, and we found is really the best way to make these work, because there's often, high rehab needs, and then also rents are on the lower end. It's just really hard for these types of properties to acquire and do the necessary immediate repairs with debt alone. So, that's what I'll say.
Anything else you want to add, Dan? Okay, well, let's jump then into some of the questions that have already come up. Let me pull them up. All right, so someone asked a question about the ability to use tax credits for this type of project for AC rehab. So can you talk about some of the challenges there for this particular project type? Maybe we'll start with Eve, and Dan, if you want to chime in, you can chime in as well.
Yeah, I think for small, medium family, it is if we're talking about 25 units and under is pretty challenging. I think if you're able, one of the earlier presentations, I think we had the Unity Council was presenting, and they actually acquired 3 different properties on the same block that totaled 80 units, and so in that way, I think their long-term plan may be to re-syndicate and use a 4% tax credit with that, but sort of without gathering several different properties through like a scattered site type of transaction, I think tax credits are just not the right vehicle for financing this type of property.
Okay. Dan, anything you want to add?
Yeah, Eve's correct about that. A program that I wanted to briefly mention that could be of interest to California-based nonprofit developers is an HCD, Housing Community Development Department program called the Portfolio Reinvestment Program. And there was a recent NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability, that has resulted in a number of nonprofits and for-profits being able to obtain loans to undertake renovation. And we're actually working with one of the organizations that has a proposal into them. I believe that we're about to hear if they have it, but it's also in Stockton, 3 apartment buildings that are in terrible condition, that were run down by the owners, and HCD is actually foreclosed on these properties and is selling them to a social service agency. We're going to be providing the short-term construction financing that will then, our takeout will be the HCD loan. And even though we may only be in these deals for 12 months, we're willing to do those kinds of short-term bridge financings.
Okay, well then we just got a question, or earlier we got a question in the chat about the availability of your loan products for projects that just need rehab, and whether that's an eligible use.
Do you
Yes.
want to take that one, Dan? Yeah. Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
much.
The short answer is yes. Mhm.
Okay. All right. Any other questions we should lift up from the chat? Other enterprise folks on the line? Let's see.
I can chime in, and there's a question about if Dan can give a brief description of the lines of credits available for nonprofit developers. So that's one question. And then there is a question about the challenges of doing site control, and if there's a competition there with other types of investors.
Great, thanks, Anais. Well, let's start with the line of credit one.
Well, our lines are can go. Our largest line right now is 500,000. We make lines available without physical collateral up to 350,000. We are able to customize the pay down provisions. It could be 45 days, 90, 120 days, but we always have to renew these annually. The interest rates are close to 6%, maybe a little higher, plus a 1% origination fee.
Great, thanks. And then the question about site control. Eve, do you want to talk a little bit about that one?
Yeah, it's, oh, go ahead, Dan.
No, go ahead.
So that is the challenge. Really, I think the example that I shared in my presentation was unique in that they didn't have to deal with sort of competing against other investors, because it was a situation where the residents, they put so much pressure on the seller, they kind of had to sell to the Bay Area Land Trust, and so they were sort of locked into that purchase contract. But if you're competing, in the open market, the timing is much shorter, and with our typical closing timeline is 60 to 90 days. So that it is not quite as fast, although I am seeing longer escrow periods now. And so if there's advice that I would give is to try to negotiate that longer, as long of a period to close as possible.
Yeah, I agree that the property in Stockton was highly sought after by investors. We were able to ask the borrower, and the borrower was able to obtain extensions in the purchase and sale agreement because of all the complexities of arranging the insurance and all the due diligence that was done. 90 days is very helpful. 120 is even better.
Okay. All right. Well, Sarah, should we take one more question, or how are we doing on time in terms of?
Let's do one more and then we'll switch it up.
Okay. Well, let's do high level kind of question then, end with that. I think, we have a mix of different participants in Preservation Next in terms of like emerging organizations and those who are more established. So I guess from the lender's perspective, what key advice would you give developers who are moving into the preservation space in terms of making sure they're prepared to take this work on?
We do work with smaller organizations, community development corporations, community land trusts. We're part of a program with Genesis LA to provide technical assistance to those kinds of organizations. And my former colleague, Ruby Harris, helped create that program. So we are willing to work with organizations that are not as stable as established developers. I think one of the questions that I come across when I speak to groups like this is they need to understand what they're getting into. They need to know what they don't know. They need to get advice from established sources. Our own consulting department provides a great deal of technical assistance to emerging developers. And they need to be willing to roll with the complexities and the quirkiness of preservation projects.
Yeah, I would echo what Dan said, and just you know, if for those that are, you know, emerging and getting into this, oftentimes, you know, from a lender's perspective, we will require, you know, prior experience with some similar projects. So if you don't have that prior experience, you know, partnering with an organization that does would really help out. Or I think it would not just help out, it would be required. So establishing those relationships, finding other organizations that work in this space and that are willing to partner is important. And then, you know, for folks that are already in the space, just, you know, attending these sessions, making yourself aware of all the different resources that are available. They're not a ton of them, but there, you know, it's gaining traction and growing. So just, and make use of your public resources.
I agree with her comments.
Okay, thank you. And I think that resonates even more as we hopefully are going to be seeing more resources, public resources coming down the line, making sure that you're ready to kind of go after those as soon as they do become available. So we had a lot of questions come in kind of with various different angles. We're gonna try to get answers to all of those questions, either you know, Dan and Eve, if you want to take a quick look at the chat and can quickly answer some of those, which you've done already, that would be great. And if some remain unanswered, we'll make sure we get those answers to you, but lots to cover. And sorry that we have to kind of move on now, but we'll make sure we get answers over to you all. I think with that, I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Great. All right. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Eve and Dan. It's great. I really appreciate you all spending some time with us today. So now we're going to dig into a little nitty-gritty with a financial modeling tool developed by Zack Patton. Zack is the Director of Incubation, Cultivation, and Acceleration at Enterprise Advisors, Enterprise's mission-based consultancy. He supports local governments and private organizations across the country and work related to housing planning and policy. Zack also worked with us leading the effort to create the Preservation Next toolkit. And we'll spend a little time with us today to introduce this financial modeling tool, which is available to everyone. This model can be used to assess feasibility, different scenarios by changing inputs. It's currently in an Excel format, which you can download, but we will be working this year to develop an online version that's a bit more interactive. So thank you so much, Zack, for joining us today. Continue to pop questions in the chat. Pass to you, Zack.
Thanks, Sarah. Let me share my screen here. So you can see my slides. There you go. Can you see the slide view?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Great. So I'm going to be, as Sarah said, talking about the Preservation Next financial model. This is something that it's actually kind of the second version of this that we did. We had an earlier version that we did as part of a effort that was focused in the Southeast, but it really responds to a need that we've heard in communities that we've worked with across the country, from emerging developers, service providers who are thinking about bridging into the housing space, where the financial modeling piece is jargon filled and opaque and difficult, and people really need a place to start. And so the goal with this work is really to provide a kind of general use case model for people to jump in and understand some of the details of real estate development, in this case, preservation, and to have a good place to start with that. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about just financial modeling generally, and then we'll take a look at the tool, and then we have a short case study to see what that tool looks like in practice. So quickly, why is financial modeling important? First is thinking through my development budget. What are my upfront costs I need to consider for my preservation project? Have I thought through what this is really going to cost when all things are considered at the end of the day? So having a template with line items that make me think through, that prompt me on some of those costs is a helpful exercise to go through, where and thinking about where I might need to find ways to reduce costs to meet a budget that I have for the development. Second is mapping out capital sources. So do I have enough funding to cover my expected costs? Where is that going to come from? How much will it cost to obtain? How much debt is going to be feasible for me to take on for this development? If I have a gap, how big is that gap? And I need to figure out how to fill that gap. And then thinking through the income and expenses in operating the property. So understanding how affordability and rent levels of my unit are going to influence my property's income over time, and where I need to anticipate operating expenses. And then based on the above, assessing my property's performance and feasibility. So I need to understand for myself whether my property's financial performance is going to be adequate to meet the needs of everyone involved, both today and in over some number of years in the future. And so that's really the, why this is important. And then lastly, being able to take all of that and then demonstrate it to others, right? So regardless of my own understanding of my property's performance, I need a clear way to demonstrate that to lenders, to local government programs, to investors, whoever else is going to be supporting my development, and to kind of demonstrate that this deal works for everyone involved. So overall, financial modeling is a really important skill set to develop as someone who is thinking about small and medium multifamily preservation, because even though it can be a difficult and daunting set of information to go through, ultimately it helps you make decisions from a place of knowledge and have a complete picture of what is realistically a highly complex set of processes and inputs and outputs that are going into your development. So what makes a development financially feasible? So first and foremost, do I have a reasonable and defensible estimate of my upfront costs that matches my total amount of funding I expect to have? So are my sources of funds matching my uses of funds? So that is a basic feasibility criterion that should be intuitive to everybody. But second is making sure this deal meets the criteria for everyone involved. And this is where it gets a little bit more nuanced. So meeting lender expectations, which means, for example, knowing that I'm only going to borrow up to a maximum loan to value ratio for the loan product I'm planning to apply for, or being able to demonstrate that the property can maintain a minimum debt service ratio, which is the ratio of the property's net operating income to the debt service payments. So we'll look at that in the model. So lenders will have a minimum ratio that they need to see a property meet in order to loan me the funds. So if my net operating income can't justify the size of the loan I need, that means I need to figure out a way to increase my operating income or decrease the size of the loan I'm going to apply for. And that's in addition, those are just two examples. So that's in addition to other things lenders are going to be looking for. So for example, you've mentioned having operating or tax and replacement reserves. So, the financial model is a way to kind of make sure all those boxes are going to be checked for your lender and for your investors. So meeting investor return and exit expectations. If I'm expecting investors to provide equity for my development, they're going to expect some level of return. So I need to be able to demonstrate that. This is not, I will say, a huge focus of our model due to the variation of what this can look like for different kinds of investors and tax credit benefits and so forth. But if you know the investor that you're working with, it's something you can kind of build in yourself. To think about how that investor thinks about returns and what their exit timeline might look like. But that's an important part of the modeling process. And then resident needs. So are the rent levels I'm planning for going to be affordable for my current or expected tenants? There may be specific restrictions on rents that my funding sources that come along with my funding sources, or there may be specific targets that I have based on my mission or the folks that I'm trying to serve with the development. But regardless, that needs to be part of the financial feasibility thinking. And then lastly, meeting my own needs as the developer operator. So I need to think about whether this deal makes sense for me at the end of the day. So this could be about my developer fee and what portion of that I'm receiving up front, my expected cash flow over time from the property after other outlays are covered. If my organization is going to be managing the property, is my expected management fee adequate to cover the administrative burden of that management? And then given the changes that I may need to make to the development in the course of figuring out what is going to be feasible, is that then meeting the other criteria that I have, like mission alignment, my goals for improving the property and so forth, sustainability and environmental considerations. So all of these are kind of interrelated concerns, but all of financial modeling is where a lot of these end up playing out. And then lastly, just a few general things to keep in mind, particularly if you've never worked with financial models before. First is that they can be daunting at first. They have lots of jargon, acronyms, terms that are not defined anywhere. And so that's one of the things that we've been focusing in our efforts are really to ease that burden a bit. Second is that financial modeling is realistically an iterative process. So you're not going to know everything when you start, and that's okay. Numbers are going to change as you get more information. So expect that. And making changes in one area is inevitably going to force you to make changes in the other areas. So if you find out that construction is going to be more expensive than you thought it would be, then that's going to impact your capital needs as well. So this is that iteration is kind of a normal part of the process. And then overall, it is worth the time to do this and to do this well, and for you to understand how all of it works, because understanding the nuts and bolts of the financial model for your development or your property is going to improve your decision making and ultimately the outcomes you're going to be able to achieve with your work. So with that, I will show you the model that we put together for the Preservation Next site. As Sarah mentioned, this is kind of the first iteration of this. We're working on an online version, and we're also exploring some more market-specific inputs for some of these so that it could be a little bit more customized. But for now, we have the general model on the website. And if you're on the site, you can navigate that by going down to tools and then to the financial modeling tools section, and then clicking to download the model. And when you open it, it is going to look like this. There is an instruction set, and then the model is separated into 5 different tabs. You've got development costs, which captures all the various costs to develop your model. You have an operating budget, which is your income and expenses that you're going to have for your property over time. Your capital sources, which capture all of the permanent sources of funds for the development of this project. We really don't capture, we don't have a separate capital section for construction financing. That's just part of the development model. And then we have a 15-year operating pro forma that you can use to look at the costs over time. And then lastly, a sources and uses statement where you can map your sources of capital to the uses of capital and make sure that there's parity there. I am looking at the clock and realizing we're at time. So my plan was to go through a case study so that you can see what this looks like filled out. But in lieu of that, I'm just going to point out a couple of quick things, features of this model. So the first is that on each of these tabs, there's a button up here where you can show and hide the instructions for that tab. And it walks you through some of the key metrics that you're going to use for assessing feasibility associated with that section of the model. And then the second thing is that we've added little tooltips to each of the inputs. So the inputs are all of these kind of tan shaded cells that you can see. And this is something that's often missing from a lot of models where you're like, I don't know what this term means. How am I supposed to fill this out? So in this case, we've kind of said, okay, well, here's what this is. Here's what it includes, what it doesn't include. You know, here's where you might find this information in some cases, or who you might need to ask about this. And so we're hoping that that really provides a better starting point for folks who are really just trying to get a better handle on financial modeling and ultimately understanding what their development looks like on paper. So I will stop there, I think.
Thanks.
And we might have, I can respond to some questions in the chat to make up for time.
Okay, yeah, I think one can be, let's just do one or two live and then it's all good. So first question is just noting that many capital sources require a 20-year pro forma. So would it be possible to amend the tool to allow for, different terms?
Yeah, that's definitely something we can do. I should have mentioned this, we launched this recently, and so we'd love if you're using it and you have suggestions like that, if additional features you'd like to see, we'd love to hear those. So that's a great one, and we can certainly extend the timeline there. But other things that you encounter, like why isn't there a line item for this? Or one of the things that I noticed in doing the case study is we focus on the first stabilized year in our pro forma, but we don't really cover the construction years in a way that is really allows for a period where you're still under construction financing and not yet paying on your permanent financing and so forth. So I was thinking that might be a feature that we add as well.
Yep, that's great. Zach, just a question on some of the kind of assumptions and information we're putting in. So will the tool include a schedule of fees that is up to date with industry costs for construction and rehab costs? Just noted that the rehab estimates are difficult to discern, especially for emerging developers who are still building relationships with the building industry.
Yeah, we don't currently have a schedule of fees in there, but that's something that we're thinking about when I mentioned the more location specific versions of this, having some starting assumptions and kind of reasonable estimates for things to help folks who may not have the experience to say, oh yeah, that's going to be about, X per unit or something like that, to give folks that better starting point. So appreciate that suggestion.
Great. Well, so we do have a few more questions in the chat and kind of comments, suggestions. So we're going to respond to those in the chat and after the fact as well. And we're likely going to ask Zach to join us again at some point so that we can dig into some examples and some of the tool functionality. Again, recommend that everybody dig into it, check it out. If you do note anything that you'd like to ask a question about, feel free to email me or Jesse. I'll pop our emails into the chat and we can then work with Zach to get responses or updates out to folks. So a huge thank you, Zach, for your participation today. All right, so we are now going to pass over to Ruby, who's going to introduce the next speakers.
Thank you. I'm really excited to welcome the next two speakers to the stage. Oscar Monge and Tom De Simone. And let me just do a quick introduction of each, and then I will pass the mic over to you, Oscar. So Oscar is a native Angelino that aspires to stabilize gentrifying communities through community building and community land control. He joined T.R.U.ST South LA in 2017 and recently stepped into his new role as Associate Director of Community Development to support T.R.U.ST South LA's large-scale and small multifamily housing projects, their member and leadership development activities, as well as managing daily operations. Oscar is also an active member of the board for the California Community Land Trust Network and his local Cypress Park Neighborhood Council's Land Use and Housing Committee. Welcome, Oscar. And then Tom. Hi, Tom. Tom has served as president and CEO of Genesis LA since 2013 and is responsible for overseeing Genesis LA's operations. Tom has sourced, structured, and closed more than $350 million in direct CDFI lending and new markets tax credit investments for Genesis LA. And he has helped to grow Genesis LA's capital resources by raising $55 million in new debt and equity capital for CDFI lending, as well as $190 million in new markets tax credit financing. Since he's been in leadership, Genesis has grown by 5 times. Really exciting to welcome you both. And I'm going to pass it over to Oscar, who's going to talk about one of their shared projects.
Thank you, Ruby. Yes, so I went through my slides a couple of times, and I think I'm going to make up for time that we went over in the lesson a little bit. But again, thank you, Ruby, for the intros. I'm Oscar with T.R.U.ST South. I'm our Associate Director. And today I'll be talking about a couple of our projects that are preservation projects. Next. T.R.U.ST South launched as a community-driven vision to stop the displacement of longtime Black and Brown residents in South Central LA. We are a member-led community land trust, and we started in 2005, established as a democratic and permanent steward of land to challenge the role that speculators, absentee owners, slumlords, and corporations have had in what our neighborhoods look like. Next. We're currently operating in contested terrain. There is development pressures that are coming from downtown Los Angeles, development pressures from the University of Southern California, or USC for short. There's also many transportation public investments. So right now we're seeing an increase in houselessness and also private development in our communities. Next. This year, we're prioritizing increasing our preservation efforts using the FIP program, the United to House LA program, and a local community benefit agreement. T.R.U.ST South LA, among other community land trusts, took key roles in advocating and designing those programs. And so we're happy to hear those programs are going to be a resource for many other CLTs and organizations throughout California and Los Angeles. We also plan to work closely with our tenants to begin education on tenant ownership models. Most importantly, we're working to increase our land stewardship capacity through project management and asset management. Next. So today I'm sharing about our community mosaic preservation program. T.R.U.ST South LA established this program back in 2016 with the intent of stabilizing low-income families in South Central Los Angeles, rehabbing and transitioning them to tenant ownership. Next. So the types of properties that T.R.U.ST South LA has focused on are below 80% AMI with some cash flow. We also are looking to accommodate larger families. Traditionally we've focused in 8 units or less, but we're adjusting those units as guidelines for public sector fundings are coming out. We've also sought out buildings with organized residents. Next. Okay, so here are some of the considerations that T.R.U.ST South LA had when we analyzed the feasibility, the financial feasibility of buildings. The first thing is acknowledging that we need to, just because of the cost of in the market, we have to adjust for doing incremental upgrades over time or rehabbing with operating resources on the buildings. I also want to highlight that back in 2016, we had a unit, a cost per unit cost closer to $120,000 to $160,000 per unit. We're now seeing closer to $250,000 to $350,000 per unit. So the market has increased significantly. Next. Okay, so here's our first property. It's a 5-plex. It's about 110 years old. It's a 4-plex at the front and an ADU on the back. In the first couple of years, T.R.U.ST South LA focused on addressing slum housing conditions. We were able to secure a CDBG grant of $50,000 to do lead abatement in this property. We have also been able to renovate individual units. And we have been prioritizing building relationships with the tenants, doing leases with the tenants so that house rules are compatible with what the tenants want to see in this building. And as we're working forward to this year, we're also doing more educational alternative ownership models, like limited equity housing co-ops. Next. Okay, so another key piece about this acquisition was our partnership with Genesis Los Angeles. At the time, there's more of this, I guess in conversations with Tom, there's more opportunities now than there were back then. Back in 2016, there was a very unique way of packaging a loan for organizations, where we were allowed to pay interest only while we were able to prepare our finances to have incremental mortgage payments over time. This is a 10-year loan, and we're working in close partnership with Genesis LA to be able to have those conversations with their tenants about how do we go to a different loan at year 10 or transition the property to tenant ownership. So those are conversations that we're having now as we enter year 7 of this loan. Next. Okay, so here is a duplex. This is one of our most recent acquisitions. We acquired this thanks to the Los Angeles County Community Land Trust Program. This is it was part of a $14 million program that worked with 5 community land trusts throughout Los Angeles, and we secured over $700,000 from the county to make this possible. But a key piece here was that the previous property owner was mission aligned with us. They wanted to create tenant ownership opportunities for their tenants. And so they ended up selling this property at 1/3 of the price in the market, or $475K for a duplex, about 1 mile away from the university. Next. Here's the second acquisition with the LA County Community Land Trust Program. It's a 4-plex. The unique piece here is we were able to close a rehab gap that we were anticipating with a community benefit agreement pot of funding of $125,000. This is working in close coalition with United Neighbors in Defense Against Displacement, or NEDAP for short, which awarded those funds for us to be able to do rehab in the property. Next. Okay. So I won't go into detail here. I hope that it's large enough for folks to see and folks get the slides later. But here, what we're able to see is like the desperate need of deeper subsidy in our projects so that we're able to sustain and stabilize low-income residents in our communities. And you're also able to see that we've been able to secure 2 community benefits agreement, right? We were able to get a community benefit agreement for the initial acquisition. It was a 232 community benefit agreement, again, from UNIDAD, from a private development in our community. And last year, we got the second community benefit agreement for our third property of $125,000. But again, deeper subsidy from the county, from the public sector is making this accessible to us. As the prices again are increasing, we are now seeing over an 80% increase in the market on a per unit cost. Next. Okay, this is my final slide. I wanted to do a quick shout out to the LA Community Land Trust Coalition members that are in this meeting today, and also LAFLA staff. This is our third-party report to look at analyze the successes of the LA County Community Land Trust Program, and also highlighting why we need more public subsidy in our programs, in our projects, and also I guess I wanted to do like an ask, right? Like the FIP program, the FIP funds were successfully achieved like over a year ago. And so we need to work together to make sure that those funds come out, because the expiration date of 2026 is quickly approaching. So just a call for action, right, to get together and demand that the funds come out as quickly as possible. I think next, and that's my final slide, and I'll pass it to Tom.
Thanks, Oscar. So as Oscar had said, when we at Genesis started lending in the space, we were reacting to was really a void in the market for this kind of financing for these kinds of community-based buyers. And so I wanted to share a little bit of what we've learned from that experience and how it's informed our work going forward. So I was asked to talk a little bit about our products, and I will start that by saying we don't approach this work with a standard product. We think that because we're trying to solve a lot of these conditions on the ground in real time, we have to approach this with a lot of open-ended flexibility. Obviously, there are some broad scale terms that we have to live within, but our flexibility to be able to structure is very key in being able to be responsive. And we also did this work with Oscar at a time when there was no local public subsidy. Oscar's team had to put together private subsidies through CDAs and philanthropy and such. And so we were dealing with a lot more debt in that particular project. And so I do want to caveat it with what many people on this call probably already know. When there is little or no subsidy, you're either going to have deals that are completely infeasible and you can't do them, or you're going to have to be really creative in how you structure and layer in different private capital. So our approach then, as is now, is to really give these kinds of projects a lot of runway to stabilize. And so you could see that in some of the terms that Oscar had on his slide, where we introduced our financing with an interest-only period for a couple of years. And so that allowed time to rehab the property, to stabilize the property, to get your bearings on the conditions in the property. We also provided a single loan that covered acquisition, that covered rehab, and converted to a permanent period. And we did that for 10 years. And I think you have to approach this kind of lending if there isn't a known takeout up front with a longer term horizon, so that you can both amortize the loan a little bit, complete those repairs, but also let the borrower and the project establish an operating history that a future lender can really look at to understand what you're getting into. Another piece was that we approached rehab on a phased calendar. Unlike the approach with tax credits, for example, where you get all your money up front and you strip the building to the studs and you basically rebuild it, you don't have that luxury here. And so if the roof has 3 more years on it, let it have those 3 more years and wait to spend those dollars. You can even be flexible with allowing for the reprogramming of cash flows to fund future rehab, which is something that we did with Oscar's group on the Mosaic project. Another piece that I wanted to touch on is the partnership that we developed with T.R.U.ST South LA. So there's a lot of pre-feasibility work that we had to put into this, and I think is still pretty common, because when you're working in the open market, like a lot of folks in this space are, you need to be able to move really quickly. So you're not going to have the time to dive into diligence and take your time. You have to be able to close escrow in 30 or 45 days, because that's what these buildings transact in the normal marketplace, and they're not going to wait around for you. Another piece too is that you're dealing with buildings that are existing, they're operating. So this isn't like you're buying a piece of land and after you acquire it, you have a year or two to figure out your designs, your capital stack, all that. You're walking in day one and you're going to have to operate this the day you close. So there's a lot of vetting, I think, that you have to do. And we as a lender really rolled our sleeves up with T.R.U.ST South LA and other borrowers to really understand what that is, so that they can be as quick to move in the market when the opportunities do arise. So some of those things that you're dealing with is that you're inheriting tenants. You're not putting tenants in from scratch, right, as in new construction. And so you might not know the AMIs, the incomes of these tenants, how that aligns with certain public funding. You are going to have some assumptions on the rehab of the property, but as I think Eve may have said earlier on in the presentation, always pad that, always have contingencies, because these buildings, most are quite old, and there's things that you can't see on the surface that are going to arise. I think I also saw something in the chat, which was a very good point. Don't rely on a standard inspection, like a home inspection or a physical needs assessment. try to have a contractor on board who can really dig below the surface, crawl under the house, go up on the roof, and not say, this isn't my expertise, hire somebody else for that piece of the report. You need to know those sorts of things to the best of your ability when you walk into this. The third piece is the need for subsidy. So in high cost markets like California, just the gap between what debt you can support on a rent roll in these low income preservation projects and what projects sell for, the properties sell for, is just so wide that in some cases you can't support any debt. If your incomes are so low, you'll use that rent to cover your operating expenses, and there's no net income left to support debt. And you're seeing more of that now with what Oscar talked about. Our all-in cost on the Mosaic project with Oscar was about $153,000, and the more recent projects are in the high $300,000 to $400,000 total costs. That includes rehab, and part of that is the market dynamics, and part of it is also that we deferred a lot of stuff when we did the first project because we had no choice. It was don't do anything or allow rehab to happen over time, and so those things weren't in the initial budget. They were things that were funded over time through recycling cash flow. And we were able to do some of those things by, like I said, charging interest only for the first couple of years, so that more of the cash flow stayed with the borrower to do some of those repairs, as opposed to coming to higher principal and interest payments for a loan like ours. So the market dynamics are a big factor. And I can say, just as I close here, this is a time to be prepared. Who knows what will happen in the marketplace? But we did something like this before we worked with Oscar, and we worked with a social service provider to acquire foreclosed properties in the open market. And we acquired duplexes and single family homes for $100,000 to $200,000 in Los Angeles. I think it's unlikely we'll see declines in prices like that again, but building the infrastructure that folks on this call are doing and being ready to strike when those similar opportunities arise is really important to be thinking about, because the market will be more advantageous at some point. And I hope that folks like us can take advantage of that and not just your speculative buyers.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Oscar and Tom. I wanted to go into a couple of questions that are in the chat here. One of them that I think is super interesting question, and both of you can answer it, I think, is what is a community benefits agreement and who is it with? You talked a little bit about how you've negotiated some community benefits agreements, Oscar, and I know, Tom, you've worked on a big one in LA also. And so I'm curious if both of you can speak to that.
Let's see, I'll start with the CBA because that's like the community benefit agreement. So we're part of a coalition that actually dates farther than T.R.U.ST LA's history. It's the UNIDAD coalition, the United Neighbors in Defense Against Displacement. It's one of the coalitions that has a lot of history working against displacement and against like development that is will not have good benefits for our community. And so I believe I've seen at least 3 or 4 CBAs. This one that I was referring to, it's a Lorenzo building that is housing predominantly students, USC students in South Central. And basically the thing is they wanted to develop it, and UNIDAD was working to sue them so they don't develop it. And if they developed it, there will be benefits for the community. And so those benefits for this one looked like, making sure there's like housing for low-income residents within the building, making sure that there is, I believe there's a St. John's clinic, making sure that the St. John's has subsidized rent for their clinic, for their community clinic. And the other piece was making sure there's a development, affordable housing development dollars available. And so in the first iteration of the program, UNIDAD Coalition worked like, and with Laflett's support and other attorneys, work to push the developer, the private developer, to pay up to the community. And those funds are managed by the Unidad Coalition through another, I guess in our case, we work with the California Endowment, who is managing some of the resources. And then Unidad Coalition is responsible for setting up a structure where the dollars are put back in the community, and they go through an application process, which T.R.U.ST South has applied for. But those are unique opportunities, right? If there's private development in our communities, like that's where, if there's coalitions that are watchdogging those, like, learning from Unidad is going to be really helpful, I think. And there's the USC CBA that Tom and I talk a lot about. It's a $20 million investment or more that has come out with $5.6 million for preservation that Genesis LA is helping administer. It was a city and USC agreement. And so we've learned a lot in that process. That's actually goes into one of the questions that I was given about what we've learned. The city is not yet set up to deploy public resources for preservation strategies in the timeliness that is needed to be competitive in the market. Like, that's like the lesson learned. Like, they are unless we fix that a little bit more, put more oil on it, like, I don't know, do something on it, right? It's not gonna work out having public resources. And it's a worry, right? A concern that comes out for the ULA resources as well, that we're currently advocating for, of like, how do we design and create an environment where the city is able to create an ecosystem that actually makes preservation programs like deployable, like doable. But Tom, I'll pass it back to you. You want to add more?
Yeah, I think you covered it well. I would just say, don't always think of the government as the source of subsidy. There are tools like this that are out there. And I think in terms of advocacy, I think at least in our market, there's sort of a tendency to put all of these kinds of resources towards traditional low-income housing tax credit new development. And groups like T.R.U.ST South LA and Oscar's work is to sort of remind public officials that there are more than one way to do affordable housing.
Thank you. And then another question is, Oscar, as T.R.U.ST South LA works towards growing its pipeline and getting to scale, what kind of supports does, types of financing or other types of supports does T.R.U.ST South LA or organizations like yours need?
Yeah, this is another, Tom and I got a chance to check in earlier last week or week prior about part of that question, like, right, like the purpose of showing like the three projects was to show the diversity of resources, and specifically looking at community mosaic does not have public resources. When we have an emergency and we need to do a repair, we just do it, right? For the case of the other projects that are carrying county resources, it is a very lengthy process to get approvals to do like repairs, to do rehab in the properties. And there's really like, there's big, more requirements, general contractor requirements that fit certain criteria in their insurance documents, the prevailing wage piece that we believe in paying people their, fair amounts, but it's like who is actually set up, which general contractor is actually set up to do rehab in 5-unit buildings or a duplex, right? Like they're more, the system is set up more for the larger scale development. And so the type of assistance that will be needed, right? Yes, we need subsidy, we need money, we like to acquire this, right? But the other pieces, right, is like working with if we're gonna have to comply with those requirements, we need to set up like the conditions in the right place for this ecosystem to work. Getting general contractors that are qualified, having a bench of folks that are, they have been vetted, we can just call them, they have all the documents that they need, right? And we submit those, and it makes a more streamlined process, like on like what we just had right now, where we were gonna start repairs January 9th. Now we were pushed back to like early February because we didn't have 1 or 2 documents that were needed to be approved And these are repairs for like to fix the pavement in outside of our unit and a fence. Like that's what we can't start that work until right. So
yeah, I mean, there's definitely a funding environment, a policy and political environment, right? And then thinking about sort of how to manage those rehabs and the permitting and all of that. And so there will be other preservation next sessions about policy, both policy and rehab. So everybody please, come back to talk about those in a lot more detail than we're able to get into today. Sarah, how are we on time?
I think there would be one more brief question. We can do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's one more question for you, Oscar. It says, what is your strategy for assessing social feasibility? For example, the will of the tenants, political climate, and how do you balance that assessment with your financial assessment, your financial feasibility for the project?
At this moment, T.R.U.ST South has only been able to do the acquisition phases and like the rehab phases and some 10 education. So we haven't been able to get to like the place where we can assess financial feasibility for transitioning those properties to ownership should the tenants want to get there. So I guess my answer would be more on the acquisition side. And we're buying properties in the market. It's very rare the cases that we buy properties where there is organized tenants, or like in the case of the duplex where we were able to buy a property where the landlord was like the key player and they waited for us like 7 months, right? In escrow, a 7-month escrow period, and reduced the price on their property 3 times because they wanted to make it work for us, right? So those cases are so rare that I feel like those are the kinds of conditions that like when we hear that from folks, like we're gonna go for those, right? Like we're gonna make that work because having a patient seller is ideal and we are able to secure the resources that we need. So that's how we're able to like move forward. But when we have like a tenant, we had cases where landlords or property owners, they just wouldn't accept our offers because they knew that it was the resources were coming from the county, right? Which I think it's illegal. I think it's illegal to not accept offers of where the resources come from. Because like later we closed on our next acquisition and their property was still on the market. I'm like, you could have sold that to us. But it's like there's I think that's a political climate that public subsidy is not widely accepted in the market as offers. And so there's like like working with landlords, right? Building those relationships specifically with the property owners, which we've done for the last 2 acquisitions. The community mosaic we had to buy on the market a little bit quicker than the last 2 acquisitions. I hope that answers a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you both. I appreciate it. We're going to wrap up this and I'm going to pass it back to Sarah, but I appreciate both of you coming to join us today.
Yes, thank you so much, both of you, for speaking and Ruby for moderating. It's great. I know we are at time. I just want to highlight our next session. Please check that out and go ahead and register. We'll be talking about sustainability and health considerations in small to medium multifamily preservation. We'll have, again, some examples, priorities and tools specific to California, as well as some national speakers. So look forward to seeing you all again in a few weeks. And again, a big thank you to all of our speakers today and attendees. Thanks, everyone.